Hello and welcome to Türkiye Talks. Today I am joined by Kadir Üstün from Washington and Ramazan Erdağ from Eskişehir. Hi. Today we are going to talk about NATO summit. Again, we are going to discuss Ukrainian crisis. We are in the first month of it. It is a prolonged conflict, armed conflict. And we are going to discuss Biden's visit to Europe. So all are on the table. I want to start with Kadir, with you, if you don't mind. How do you see the Biden's visit to Europe and his attending to NATO summit under these circumstances while Ukrainians are still resisting to Russian invasion?
Thank you, Bora. Biden's visit is going to be historic. He's already attended multiple summits, including NATO summit, G7, G20, and his promise, as we discussed before many times, his promise to the world was he was going to rejuvenate the Western alliance. He was going to reinvest in the institutions of the Western alliance, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine has basically provided him with the first serious test of his promise. So far, he's been able to maintain unity within NATO. He's been able to, garner support from the allies for Ukraine, but he's also criticized by some that he had taken off the table the option to use force, American force, which may have ensured that Putin was kind of assured that he was not going to face NATO forces or American forces. So he gets some criticism for that, for ruling out any kind of American military involvement or NATO involvement, and also his refusal to create a no-fly zone. And there's some news that Poland is going to ask NATO to provide some peacekeeping missions in Ukraine, but US seems cold to that idea as well, which would mean, putting NATO forces on the ground in Ukraine in direct conflict with Russia. So it's a historic visit for Biden to continue to maintain this unity within the Western alliance, but at the same time, he has to be careful about not involving the US in the war directly. But the US has already provided a lot of military support and financial support, something like $2 billion in total, I believe, so far, and a lot of it has been also dispersed already. And we hear reports about Ukrainians even buying tanks from Russian soldiers, offering money for helicopters and planes if Russian soldiers, generals, gave those to the Ukrainian side. This shows, they have a lot of financial resources, and then they also are getting a lot of military equipment from the West. So Biden will need to, again, create that appearance of unity within NATO and then discuss next steps. And he's likely to announce more sanctions, but he wants to coordinate those with the EU partners first during the summit and then announce it maybe this week on Thursday. It's an important test for him. It's an important issue for him for his legacy. But at the same time, like you said, this war has been going on for a month now, and it might take much longer. And maintaining unity within the Western alliance is going to be his main challenge going forward.
Maybe we should also talk about NATO's new, preparations for declaring their new strategy. Every decade, we can say, NATO declares its new approach, new security formula. And we are probably on the eve of great changes. Actually, President Biden talked about a new world order, which reminded me the statement of George Bush father in 1990s. He was talking about a new world order. Actually, when you use this term, it is a little bit vague, but it implies that there is a change in balance of power or the way things are being managed in foreign policy. So, Ramazan Hocam, I want to ask you about your perception of the things. How do you see the visit of Biden to Europe? Because I'd like to remind you again, another thing, you know, Donald Trump was talking about Europeans taking the responsibility of their security. He was a little bit distant to NATO's efforts to cover all the expenses of European security, and US was trying to force Germany, France to take more responsibility. Now we see that American president, new president, visiting European countries, underlining the strength of alliance and American commitment, maybe in a way. How do you see this visit and the NATO summit under these circumstances while Russians are fighting with Ukrainians in East Europe?
Thank you, Bora Hocam. First of all, Russian invasion of Ukraine made a clear statement, all NATO allies, that they have to consider new security threats and especially conventional threats. Because, as you state, international order and international actors were debating about new security challenge in near future. One of them was cybersecurity, and the other one is climate change, etc. But now, today, we are witnessing a new security and biggest security challenge deriving from Russian invasion in Ukraine, and it's a clear conventional security threat. Perhaps the world and international big actors may see, like as in the Cold War scene, nuclear weapons usage maybe. So I think this visit and NATO summit will take consideration of all NATO allies' new security challenge in terms of Russian invasion in Ukraine. And also NATO's ally will be strengthened in this sense, because the countries in Europe are witnessing and facing new security threats especially in the eastern part of the Europe. So the countries had new security measures, and they have had to new preparation for probable Russian new aggression or invasion beyond Ukraine. So this summit, I think, will ensure a new alignment formula in terms of Russian aggression. So many countries from Europe, Germany, France, and other countries will join new strengthening NATO alliance, and will lead these countries to purchase new security needs and new security gains and weapons or emanations, etc. So NATO will strengthen its military capability in terms of Russian security threat, especially in the eastern part of Europe. And I think NATO will make decision about deploying new battle groups in the eastern part of Europe, for example, in Poland and other countries directly facing security threats from Russia. So I think the United States military presence in the United States are fairly enough, but in case of new Russian invasion, apart from Ukraine, beyond Ukraine, it could be maybe a member of NATO, member of European Union countries. In this case, it's the bad scenario for these countries. So I think the NATO summit will evaluate this new situation, and also European Union countries will also consider new security trends, and they have to re-evaluate their military preparation in case of security threat deriving from Russia, and also apart from NATO alliance, apart from NATO reaction like these security threats, European Union could be considered establishing a new form of military forces or quick reaction forces, for example, established in NATO after 2002 Prague summit, NATO response force. In this case, if the European Union countries make a similar decision establishing a new military forces under European Union countries, I think Turkey is a very important element in this new security formula, because we know that Turkey has the second largest military in NATO and the largest military capabilities. Turkey also has many operational capabilities and experiences. So in the near future, European Union will need more Turkey beyond full membership and also a new security umbrella.
Well, if we look at the situation in Europe in general, especially as you have said, Eastern European countries, Baltic countries are very concerned about Russian motives and Russian attitude. But especially Poland becomes a hot point, and Biden will also visit this country. Poland became a NATO member, European Union member after the Cold War, and now they are at the front line of NATO when it comes to conflict with Russia. Do you think Biden's visit will accelerate Eastern European countries? Their concerns about Russian activities. Do you think they will accelerate their preparations for a possible conflict, or do you think they will come under U.S. protection, as you also mentioned, the security umbrella? What is awaiting us, especially when it comes to European security? Because also there are some accusations and claims that Russia may use non-conventional weapons like chemical weapons or nuclear weapons is always being discussed. How do you see this situation when we enter the second month of the war, Kadir?
Well, from the beginning of the conflict, as you remember, NATO and the US also have talked about reinforcing NATO alliance, making sure that the countries within the alliance are properly defended. And quickly there were several deployments to countries like Poland and Baltic states. There was news about new battle groups being sent to today, I think, or this week, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia. So what NATO is trying to do is reassure its own allies in the event of a potential, Russian incursion or the widening of the conflict. So this is important for NATO. And then individual NATO countries are also trying to support Ukraine. This is, of course, at their own discretion. And Baltic countries like Finland, Sweden, they had remained neutral normally, but even they started sending weapons to Ukraine. Germany, sent not only weapons to Ukraine and gave financial help, but they also announced $100 billion of their budget will be repurposed and shifted towards defense spending. That's huge, especially in the aftermath of the end of the Cold War. For Germany to take this step is very serious. So you're seeing countries near Russia in Eastern Europe and countries like Germany, who is essentially the leader in Europe, are taking serious measures in rethinking their security architecture. How they view Russia has fundamentally changed. So this will have a bearing on NATO, how NATO sees Europe. How NATO sees Russia going forward. As Ramazan Hoca mentioned, NATO in their, I think about a year, last summer, I believe, 2021 June in Brussels, they had agreed on a broadened agenda. Now they recognize that they needed to include cybersecurity, they needed to include pandemic, they needed to include broader, more global challenges on the agenda of NATO and improve the NATO concept around those worries. But now Russia invading Ukraine reminds everyone that conventional warfare is not gone. But of course, Russia's war is also a hybrid war. It's not just conventional. There's a lot of, cyber operations are happening, etc. But we've also seen the capabilities of Russia, which are very, very strong, but there seems to be a sort of lack of will to fight among the Russian soldiers. So that's another concern. But in terms of NATO's strategic concept going forward, it will have to include the possibility of traditional warfare, conventional warfare, as well as nuclear threats. Now we are sort of as close to a nuclear war as we have been, and some would argue even more so than the Cold War times. And it could be used at a smaller sort of scale. I mean, Russia, for Europe, Russia has already used that by, conducting assassinations throughout Europe by using plutonium. So this is simply an escalation in the eyes of many sort of analysts. But the bottom line is that NATO, while it's trying to reassure the allies by deploying, military forces to various countries, various member states, going forward, it's going to have to think much more broadly, and it's going to have to consider potential for nuclear war among other concerns regarding Russia. And all this will also have implications for the competition with China. Maybe we can talk about that separately.
Yeah, we should also maybe talk about international institutions after this crisis. You mentioned China, but also we will have a G20 summit this year. A Russian leader declared, he said that he's going to join that meeting, the summit in Indonesia. So do you think, Ramazan Hocam, there will be changes in institutions, in international institutions, the way things have been done so far? There was kind of balance, at least there was dialogue between the US and its allies, NATO countries, with China and Russia. It seems that Americans especially are trying to isolate this Russian administration. Do you think this will lead to a further disintegration of countries which are not friendly to Western countries under the light of these developments?
Yeah, it may be because, as we know, Western countries as I don't misleading, Russia has been excluded from G7, G8, excuse me. So it is probable that United States isolation policy towards Russia will go on further, and they will try to exclude Russia in many international organizations. It could even be in G20. Before moving this discussion, we have to consider that so far international community and international organizations were insufficient preventing this probable war, because United States and the United Kingdoms had declared and had informed the international community that Russia would probably invade Ukraine. So international community, especially United Nations and Security Council, could do nothing about this aggression. In this sense, new security challenge and new international order debates will focus on this insufficient international order. So in the near future, the international order will be discussed and talked about new implementation of international law and new regulation of international system under the United Nations system, or a new international system debates. If we talk about Russian leader Putin's probable joining meeting, which will be held in Indonesia, I talk about G20 meeting. This will provide a new chance to leaders make a direct meetings over Russian aggression or Russian war in Ukraine. If Putin decides to join G20 meeting, some countries from Western allies leaders will probably decide not to join this meeting, because they will not to face Putin's meeting in this conference. So beyond this conference or this meeting, international order should be reconsider its capabilities and its capabilities to conflict resolution, preventing conflicts, invasion, and aggression. So far, the international community failed to prevent this kind of invasion or aggression, especially in terms of Russia. So in the near future, I think Western allies are concerned about the new probable invasion from Russia. Because if the Russian war goes beyond Ukraine, it will probably directly threaten NATO and European Union members. So in this case happens, Western alliance and NATO alliance will have two options. One of them will react directly Russian threats and make a response militarily, or if they do not want to intervene directly militarily to Russia, they will have to consider NATO allies, especially NATO's Article 5th. So if we talk about future probable aggression from Russia, I think the most important security threat is the new Russian aggression in the Eastern European countries. So NATO alliance and NATO deployment and new security challenge for NATO members to prevent this scenario. So in order to prevent this scenario and military conflicts, new Russian aggression, it also needs to stress that diplomacy is the key factor preventing this kind of new invasion or aggression. Although many European Union countries do not want to face or do not want to join a meeting will also Putin will join with the meeting. They will have to consider diplomacy, and they will have to consider to directly talk with the leaders of this country, Russian leader Putin. So if Putin decides to join a G20 summit, it may provide a new chance for leaders to talk about directly, face to face, to solve this crisis.
Yeah, part of the crisis, we all actually, in general, we focus on security issues, but it has also humanitarian dimension. Right now, we have more than 3 million Ukrainians who left their countries and they are heading to Europe. I think in NATO summit, this is one of the issues which will be discussed by the allies, and Turkey has played an important role during the last decade when Turkey absorbed millions of people who escaped from wars in Afghanistan, Syria, and the civil war and terrorist attacks in Iraq. So Turkey, with its know-how and with its capacity, maybe can play a role in defining, describing, and finding solutions to refugee crisis arising from Ukrainian war. Kadir, do you think Turkey, Turkey has been a center of diplomatic visits recently, especially from Western countries? The Prime Minister of Germany, the Prime Minister of Holland, Netherlands, they came to Turkey and talked to Turkish President Erdağ, and they all underlined the importance of Turkey in this crisis, which Turkey's position was forgotten for long, especially for the last couple of years. Now it seems that they also remember the importance and capacity of Turkey, both in terms of security and also, I believe, again, the refugee issue. What do you think about that? Do you think Turkey will be at the center of these discussions one way or another?
Bora, as you know, migration and illegal migration has been a top priority for Europe when they looked at regional conflicts, and they wanted to keep refugees away from their borders, and they tried to make agreements with Turkey, which worked to some extent to keep, refugees from Syria away from Europe and make it more organized, regular, let's say, or through the legal channels instead of, through boats illegally in the Mediterranean, and that cost a lot of lives as well. So that huge migration waves from conflict zones were perceived by the Europeans as a potential, destabilizing security issue, and they wanted to isolate the continent from that. And it didn't, work to a large extent, and they didn't adopt a humanitarian approach. Normally, we saw Europeans would talk about human rights issues and all that, but when it came to refugees, accepting refugees, many countries, including the ones like Poland and others who are now taking millions of refugees, hundreds of thousands of refugees, resisted that before, and they didn't want to accept Syrian refugees. So that is something that Europeans themselves acknowledge as a mistake, and some sort of discrimination and racism happened, and they acknowledge that, which is a good thing. So the Europeans, in their approach to the refugee challenge, often tried to reduce it to a security issue, and they didn't look at it through a humanitarian perspective. But that perspective changed with the Ukraine war, which has created a double standard on the part of the Europeans. And Turkey has more than a decade now of experience of hosting millions of refugees and caring for them. and it has been consistent in its approach in terms of treating them as humans and not as a security problem or as a burden, and it has been a huge challenge. Unfortunately, a similar scenario is now being experienced in Ukraine. There's 3.5 million refugees now already, and it has been only a month. Unfortunately, that's a big challenge that, kind of pushes Turkey and other countries to try to find a solution for a ceasefire, for a diplomatic solution as soon as possible, because we talked about the strategic game, we talk about the military confrontation and how Russia is not able to achieve a quick victory, but there is a huge human cost, and Turkey is very interested in resolving this conflict soon. Turkey has already received more than 50,000 Ukrainians as refugees, so it's going to be a challenge for the whole region as well as the NATO alliance. And when NATO is looking at the confrontation with Putin's Russia, when it's trying to isolate it, when it's trying to impose economic costs, so far Russia is not really pulling back, although they are talking to Ukrainians. There is talks. It's not like there are no talks and all the communication channels are broken, but there's no serious sign at this moment of Russia giving up anytime soon. They have maximalist demands and they are insistent on it. So in that sense, Turkey's value has been much more appreciated after this crisis, I think. That's why the Chancellor Scholz visit to Turkey and the latest Netherlands Prime Minister Rutte visiting Turkey, and they I think attach much more importance to Turkey these days, partly because Turkey is part of NATO and it is directly impacted by this crisis through the changing dynamics in the Black Sea, and also because Turkey's long-standing experience vis-a-vis the refugees. Ramazan Hocam, maybe I should ask you one question and we can maybe finish there. How do you see the Black Sea security? Is this directly impacts Turkey? Turkey has NATO allies along the Black Sea coast, but now Russian access to Black Sea and Russian coastline is going to be much larger unless Russia, accepts defeat and returns all of Crimea to Ukraine, which is very unlikely at this point. So how do you think that will that situation will be for Turkey, especially? How do Turks see it in terms of Black Sea security? As you know, Turkey also announced that it would implement the Montreux Convention as well.
Actually, the new Black Sea region will change the balance of power. As you mentioned, Kadir Hocam, Russian aggression and Russian military invasion in Ukraine reached the coastal line of Black Sea region of Ukraine. If Russia totally captured and seized for these areas, it is apparent that the new balance of power will occur in the region. So this scenario, of course, maybe will not directly threaten Turkey's security, but the new situation in the Black Sea region may lead the coastal countries, for example, Romania and the other countries, including Turkey, make a new security challenge assessment and make a new military presence in the Black Sea region. I think it is very important, as you mentioned, Turkey is applying and ruling Montreux Convention under international law, apparently all the sides. It is highly important, and Turkey is also applying an open diplomacy all the sides. I think for the diplomatic solution, Turkey's approach and Turkey's assessment new security challenge in the region, I think will ensure a new diplomatic solution chance to all actors, because Turkey has directly communication and transportation line, both countries with Russia and Ukraine. Also, one point we must mention about Turkey's economic exclusive zone in this region, Black Sea region. Turkey also, in the one side, Turkey will try to make a diplomatic solution in this crisis. And the second one, Turkey also will try to guarantee and ensure its sovereign, as a sovereign country in the region, its economic exclusive zone as well.
Thank you, Ramazan Hocam. I think we came to the end of our program today. This conflict, unfortunately, will be in the news in the coming weeks and months. We'll have to discuss it again. I want to thank you very much for joining us today on Türkiye Talks, and I want to thank our audience for following us, and we hope to see all of you in our next episode. Thank you.